Welcome to season 15 of the Parenting Aces podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, and this week we are joined by sports psychologist Josh Berger. Josh is a former junior player, college coach, and now works actively as a sports psychologist and actually has a podcast as well. So he and I are digging into what needs to happen on the parent side, also on the player side, to help all of us do better from the emotional side of tennis. And Josh offers up some great insights, some great tips and tools to help all of us be better at managing our emotions, managing our facial expressions, our body language, so that this process runs more smoothly and we all have a better outcome in the end. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with sports psychologist Josh Berger. Josh Berger, welcome to the podcast. We've been going back and forth for a few weeks now, but I'm so happy we could finally make this happen.
Thank you, Lisa. And I appreciate the opportunity to come on the podcast. And really looking forward to speaking with you.
Awesome. So we're going to start how I start with every first-time guest to the Parenting Aces pod, which is for you to give us a little bit of your tennis story, how you got started in the game, where tennis has taken you, and then we'll kind of transition into what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of my background, my parents played a little bit of tennis recreationally. I grew up in Fairfield, Connecticut, so not too far from New York and the US Open, right around an hour, slightly more, but right around there. And they were, had actually gone to the US Open the year that Jimmy Connors had his run in his late 30s and had talked about that. So they were, especially more my dad, into it, but never super serious about playing themselves. But I grew up and played different sports, baseball, basketball, soccer, enjoyed them all, but never necessarily excelled at any of them. But meanwhile, I was playing a lot of ping pong in my basement with my dad. We'd play regularly and listen to records. And then, around middle school, found tennis and, started doing some clinics, and maybe it was the individual aspect of the sport or hand-eye coordination from ping pong, but it just was a better fit for me than some of the team sports. So that quickly became my main sport, and started playing USTA tournaments, and started a little bit later than, some of my peers or some, other kids I would play in tournaments, but started really getting into it around eighth grade, and then played for my high school team. Knew I wanted to play college tennis, but, knew that, I would look at certain schools where that was a possibility and that I, felt that I could play, and ended up playing at the Division III level at Clark University in Massachusetts, and had a really great experience there. Played all 4 years, was all conference, felt like I sort of continued getting better as I went, maybe because I started a little bit later, but and then studied psychology there. Had been introduced to a couple of books on the mental side of tennis, the inner game of tennis, and Winning Ugly, which isn't exactly sports psychology, but maybe adjacent in certain ways. Then, as I was at school, I started learning more about the field of sports psychology, figured out that I wanted to go into it long term. And that was kind of the start of things. And then did my master's degree in sports psychology, did some coaching at some different places, like at Sacred Heart University at the Division I level for a couple of years with their men's and women's teams, and at the Tennis Hall of Fame in Newport, Rhode Island. And then, knew I wanted to do sports psychology full time and launch my practice in 2019. And work with a wide range of athletes. The majority are tennis, probably about 60% tennis, but people of all different sports as well. And, a lot of junior athletes, but some adult athletes as well. whether they be more, USTA recreational players, handful of higher level players, a couple of pros here and there, but the majority are, junior athletes and adult league players. But yeah, that's kind of how it all started, playing ping pong and some other sports, and then eventually tennis became the real love.
Love it. Love it. So, when you were coming up in junior tennis, did you struggle yourself with the mental side of the game? Is that what kind of led you down the psychology path in college, or was it something else that sparked that love?
So it was interesting. I would say that in certain ways, I felt that as I look back now, I felt that I feel that in certain ways I did well mentally, and then in other ways I definitely could have handled situations a lot better. I since I started a little bit later than some of my peers, I felt that I was kind of playing catch up in certain ways, and trying to trying to beat some of these players that had played for longer than me. And I started noticing that some of them, wouldn't handle their emotions well. They would be throwing their racket or breaking rackets when things weren't going well. Or they would, not always handle pressure the best. And I, fortunate, I remember I did break one racket, and then my parents told me I had to start paying for them. And then that quickly changed. That habit quickly changed. But yeah, I think I, realized that if I could handle things emotionally and not get so frustrated like a lot of the people I was playing against, that I would, it would help me, and that I would have a chance against some of these other players. So I think in terms of that piece, I did well. But I think in terms of pressure, I think there were definitely moments where my game would kind of shrink, and I would start maybe playing not to lose, or just trying to not miss or push in moments. So I think there were some ups and downs with my mental game as I sort of reflect on it now. But I think it was those experiences in junior tennis that really sparked my interest in the mental side of the game and led me to into this field and career.
Now that you're working with so many junior players and recreational adult players, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see and hear about from the athletes that you work with?
Good question. I would say pressure is probably the biggest one. I mean, there's always going to be pressure in life. I mean, Billie Jean King talks about pressure as a privilege, which is obviously a well-referenced quote. But I what I find is that there's pressure from the situation, right? You're playing in a big tournament, or it's a tiebreaker, or it's the finals of a tournament, or whatever the situation is. There's pressure from the situation, but I find that there's often quite a bit of self-imposed pressure. People tell themselves, I have to win this match. I need to. Or maybe my UTR is zero point 0.5 above my opponent, so I should win, or I'm supposed to win. So I think pressure is a big one. We can certainly talk more about, ratings and rankings and the impact of that on pressure and sort of how those are viewed. I think I know that this your podcast is about, parenting and sort of that parent athlete relationship and just best practices there. So I think that, there can be other pressures that take place, whether it be from parents, whether it be from coaches, which is, generally coming from a really good place of wanting the best for the athlete, but can sometimes lead to additional pressure. So I would say that's one of the biggest ones. But I think, now there's, junior sport and college sport have become more of a business in certain ways, with, NIL and, things like that. So, yeah, I think there, pressure, expectations, also comparisons to other people, whether this is coming from the athlete or the parent or the coach, but comparing to, oh, this other player in the same city has, gone up by this many points over the last year, or is ranked this, in the region or in the country now. is a big part of it as well.
Sure, sure. And, I stated at the very beginning of the season 15, that kind of our theme for the year was going to be really helping the parents manage their mental health and their mental toughness, if you will, while going through this process with their juniors. You talk about pressure on the player, him or herself, but what about the pressure that the parents are feeling?
It's real. It's very real. The I think there can be different pressures, based on the situation that their child is in, right? Based on maybe what age their child is or what type of tournaments. Sometimes they're jumping on a plane and going to a different part of the country or maybe a different country or getting in the car for, a number of hours to go to a tournament. And, that can come along with certain expectations and pressures about results. So I think, I think that can certainly happen. Parents are also often investing significant resources, right? There's the financial resources that are being spent on coaching, on travel, on tournaments, on things like sports psychology or strength and conditioning. So there's the financial piece, but there's also the time piece. Parents are often giving up their weekends, or maybe taking time off, or having to spend their time and energy, not just taking their kids to tournaments, but taking them to training and, scheduling and, spending significant capacity to, to help their kids with that journey. And I think that, what often happens is parents feel that, okay, I'm putting, my kid obviously is putting everything, so much into this, so there should be some sort of payoff, or there's some sort of expectation about results that is associated with that. And I think that leads to the parent sitting up in the stands, maybe not always having the best poker face through the ups and downs of matches, right? And I get that can be challenging, right? The parent can be sitting there when things are going great. They're maybe cool, calm, collected, or some fist bumps or some claps. But when things aren't going well, which is part of every young athlete's journey and every athlete's journey, it can be, I think, really tough for parents to handle that in in maybe the way that they want to. So I think being able to view themselves as a performer as well, just like their athlete is performing, but viewing themselves as sort of a performer in a similar way is, I think, an important way to be viewing it, so that they can manage their own stress and pressure and talk to themselves well and breathe and have a clear intention for how they want to handle the situation, just like they would want their son or daughter to do the same.
I've over the years talked a lot about focusing on the process rather than results. And I am nowhere near unique in that, but it's become more and more prevalent in when you talk about being a sport parent and understanding that it's not about winning and losing each time you go out to compete, but rather it's about giving best effort. It's about preparing the way you need to prepare in order to give your best effort. And all of these things, if they are done properly and with intention, as the word you used a moment ago, can then lead to better results down the road, but that the results themselves shouldn't be the goal. I think we talk about that a lot in terms of our junior athletes, but we don't necessarily talk about it as much in terms of us as parents putting forth our best effort, doing the preparation we as parents need to do in order to have better outcomes in our relationships with our children who are out there under this immense pressure. And I would love to see us do a better job at that in terms of giving parents more tools that they can use in between these tournaments, in between schlepping their kids here, there, and everywhere, in order to feel like they have put in the work themselves so that they are better prepared when push comes to shove at a match where maybe your child is having an off day, or maybe you run up against a conflict with another parent, or whatever the case may be. And I'm wondering, Josh, if you have had experience working with these athletes, but also hearing from them, gosh, I wish my parent would do X better or Y better, and helping the kid help their parent understand the importance of doing that work.
Great question. And yeah, there are definitely times where we talk about different stressors and different pressures that are impacting them, and their parents often are on that list and high up on that list. So, and again, it's coming from a good place, but it's I think can be challenging to avoid at times, or can be the parents often might not even realize it. They're sitting there watching the match, and their kid misses an easy volley, and they look up at their parents and there's some sort of reaction. So yeah, the way that I often approach that is, I would say, twofold. Number one, to help the athlete build those different skills and tools, and we can talk more about what some of those are. So that helping them build those tools that they can use on the court, but we always talk about how they can use these same tools outside of the court. Maybe it's in school or in the workplace if they're starting to work, or even in conversations with their parents. So I think that's one part of it, that they're able to build tools that they can apply on the court, but also they can use elsewhere, including at home. And then number two is, trying to be on the same page with parents, trying to have conversations, not breaching confidentiality, but trying to talk about, hey, what are we, what is our goal here, right? And I can try to explain just, sort of how I approach things, and, how we are trying to be more process based, and trying to, the way that I think about that is, can we be really intentional with mentally and physically how we're trying to go about things, right? Okay, I'm going into a match. Can I have clear goals or clear intentions about how I want to approach things? And if at the end of the match I played the way that I wanted to play physically and with my strategy, tried to trust my technique and use it, and used my tools mentally and handled situations as best as I could, to me, that's what it's all about, right? Over time, that's what's going to lead to the most growth and progress, and, by the way, results. So trying to keep that the focus and share that focus with athletes, I think, with athletes' parents, I think can help them over time to, maybe start to have a little bit of a different perspective. And then, then they can have conversations with their kids about that, and, hopefully be on the same page, and hopefully, mitigate some of those challenging moments that, that might be happening.
Yeah. And I think that intentionality is an important piece of it that we as parents need to embrace as well, right? Like, okay, my kid's playing this match today. Maybe they're playing a kid that has beaten them the last 5 times they've met. What is my intention as the parent sitting courtside watching my child out there competing, performing? Maybe my intention is to keep, a blank expression on my face. Maybe my intention is to use certain language immediately after the match, or to zip it immediately after the match. Maybe my intention is the car ride home and something having to do with that. Maybe my intention is to keep my focus on something other than what's happening on the court by keeping stats or doing a puzzle or knitting or whatever it is. And so I think that's a piece, again, that doesn't get discussed enough, that keeps parents from being their best when the parent, is also in this pressure situation. We talk a lot on this podcast about good communication, well, about communication in general. And I, over the years, have encouraged parents to be upfront and honest with their kids. Like, if your kid did something on court and you reacted in a way that you're not proud of, own it, admit it, apologize for it, and let your child know, hey, I realize I did something not great today. Maybe something rotten that made you feel not so good. I'm putting in the work to make sure I don't do that again. I just want you to know that I'm human too. I don't always do things perfectly. And I am putting in the work to get better, just as you, child, are putting in the work on and off the tennis court to become a better player.
Yep.
So, and I think, we need to keep that at the forefront of the conversation more than we have historically done.
I think you're bringing up a really important point, because when parents can model that behavior that, hey, I'm not perfect, I'm not going to be perfect, but when a mistake is made, which it will be, I am owning it. I'm taking responsibility. I'm I'm going to continue working to be better. It sends a really important message to the junior athlete that they can do the exact same, that they're not going to handle every situation perfectly on court or off court. And when they screw up, when they make a mistake, when something happens, that they, ought to go about it in that same way. They ought to own it, apologize, learn from it, and keep working on themselves, just like parents ought to be doing the same. So I think I think it's great that you're encouraging that, and I try to encourage the same, because I think it sends the right message to athletes. I think it's actually related to growth mindset, where instead of saying your things are always going to be the same going forward, right? Your ability, okay, you have a good forehand, that means you're forever, you're going to have a great forehand, and that's what your game is going to be based on. It's no, your forehand can grow over time and you can improve on it. And, and the same is true of your backhand, which maybe is your weaker shot, and your serve and your mental game, and you can get stronger physically over time. And, there will be times where you don't handle situations on court well, and you can improve on that through learning, through making mistakes, through continuously getting better. And I think when parents can be open and vulnerable enough to send that message, it, sends that really important message to, to a junior athlete, to feel like, hey, I don't need to be afraid of mistakes because they're inevitable. I'm not going to be perfect, which I think a lot of junior athletes and people in general are trying to be. I'm not going to be perfect, but I can try to be great or excellent. And a big part of that is making mistakes, losing, doing things, maybe in a way that I would have wished I did differently. But through these experiences, I grow and I continue to get better over time.
Being willing to take risks, right? And that's part of this whole notion of coachability. Young athletes who are willing to try new things, who are willing to push boundaries. And sometimes the push works and sometimes it doesn't. But when it works, it's amazing. I mean, I remember hearing Andy Roddick talk about where his serve came from. It came from being really angry on court one day in practice and just deciding he was going to hit the bejesus out of the ball, and being lucky enough to have a coach who recognized the value of this completely unorthodox service motion. And instead of trying to mold him into some other, way of hitting the ball, the coach embraced it and said, "Oh my gosh, you found something really unique and powerful that works. Let's go," and had Andy not gotten mad and not felt the freedom to do that, who knows what have happened with him and with his career. But now we have that famous Andy Roddick serve to reference, and what a cool story. You talked a few minutes ago about ratings and rankings and relating them to pressure, and I want to go back to that because I think it is so important. And I get questions, emails, whatever, from parents all the time, and pretty much I would say about 95% of the time the message opens with, "My kid is a UTR, blah 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 blah."
I get the same
That's
messages.
yeah, that's the identifying factor, right? What their UTR is. How do we get away from valuing our kids based on this arbitrary number? I mean, then yes, I understand there's an algorithm behind it. It's not 100% arbitrary. But let me just remind all of you watching or listening to this, that number is a snapshot of a moment in time. It is not a value to be held onto long term. It is a snapshot of your kids' last 30 matches, how they compare to their peers as of this moment. And how do we get away from valuing our kids in that way? I feel like not only does it add pressure to the player, but my goodness, it adds pressure to the parents as well.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah, I think it's, there's a lot here, certainly. Yeah, the UTR, and again, there's WTN and USTA rankings and plenty of, ways that people can measure ratings and rankings. But, if we look at UTR, it's just like you said, it's a snapshot. It's a snapshot of where things are right now, just based on the results that UTR has access to. They don't have access to necessarily every result. They don't see what happens at practice. They don't see what you're working on. They don't see injuries or luck or different factors. They see just the results. And for what it is, for being an algorithm, it's great at doing just that. But I think for a lot of athletes, and parents and coaches, they maybe view it as something more. They view it as, this means that this athlete is this level because on this website it says their UTR is this. Therefore, their level is blank. Okay, they're a 6 UTR. That means they're this, right? Or they're a 10 UTR, and that means something else. And I try to
And
poke
to be
holes.
fair, sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt, but to
yeah,
be fair, in a limited way, it does do that. I mean,
true.
if you were a beginning player, you were within this range. If you were an intermediate, if you were an elite, I mean, it does do that to a degree.
No, it does. It absolutely does, and I think it gives a ballpark of where somebody is. Um, but I think in order for people to not jump to too many conclusions about that number and the importance of that number, and again, I preface this by saying there is importance to UTR in certain ways. For the college recruiting process, for example, it gives coaches a idea about where you're at. Are you a candidate to play on their team or not? Could you be in the starting lineup or maybe not? So again, could you get a scholarship or not? So in certain ways, it can be really helpful, and it does give that ballpark for where somebody's at. One thing that I often will mention, just to poke holes at it a little bit, is somebody can not play in a tournament for 2-3 weeks, and their UTR might change. It might go up, it might go down. You could not play for a month or two because you're dealing with an injury and be at your all-time highest UTR. So does that actually reflect where you are in that moment? Maybe, maybe not. You can, you can go out there and play great and maybe lose matches, and your UTR can drop, and that can absolutely make you feel like, maybe my level has dropped, where in reality, you're working on things, you're playing well, but the results haven't been where you've wanted them to be. So I think in general, and again, I think there are definitely benefits to the system. But I think that, whether it's UTR, whether it's rankings or WTN or whatever it is, the hyper focus on them is the issue. The rankings themselves are not the issue. It's when they are focused on too much. And, I think this leads to incredible stress. It leads to often players not playing in certain matches, like perhaps not playing in a backdraw match or avoiding playing somebody of a lower UTR. Where instead, if we're keeping the focus on, growth and working on being the best player that you can be, these are all just opportunities to play and get better. So I think the more that it can be, the more that we can keep the focus more on the process side rather than too much on the results side of things, then we can, it leads us to trying to go about things the right way. It leads us to try to play the right way. Where if it's too much about results, I think, what I end up seeing is people end up playing not to lose, or they're, playing with fear because they're trying to avoid certain consequences. I don't want my UTR to drop. I don't want to lose to a certain player. One thing and that I like to point out as well, and I actually just looked this up to just double check the numbers here, is, I think a lot of times parents feel that because this person is ranked, a certain number in the region or in the country or maybe in the world for, ITF juniors, that's going to directly lead to success at that next level. And two great examples of exceptions to this are two of the top players right now, Aryna Sabalenka and Jannik Sinner. Sabalenka's career high ITF ranking, 225 in the world, and Jannik Sinner's was 133 in the world. And again, Sabalenka's number one, Sinner's number two right now, with obviously he was number one and has won, both have won a number of Grand Slams. So I think that's an interesting thing to look at, that, hey, a lot of the top players were good juniors, but maybe not the best ones. So if we're so focused on just this number, we might be losing the focus of really what we're trying to work towards, which is helping that player develop and grow mentally and physically, and, work towards being the best player that they can be.
For sure. And, we've seen countless examples of kids who were not at the top of their recruiting class get to college and have outstanding college careers because they were still growing as players. They had college coaches who recognized that, who were willing to put the work in with them, and, help them reach their potential, not at 17 or 18, but at 20 to 25. And what's more important, So I do think that we have got to change the way we talk about these ratings and rankings. I think we've become a lot more aware of the damage that we're doing by focusing on these numbers, and that's the first step. So the awareness is there. Now we have to change our language and our approach to the ratings and rankings. And as parents, understanding what they really mean and what value they hold, but also communicating that well with our kids, making sure the coaches are communicating the same. Because coaches love to talk about the high rankings and ratings of the kids that they coach because it's a marketing tool. they think if they can say, I'm coaching, a handful of 12 plus UTR players, that's going to help them get new students in the door. What we don't know as consumers is, what was that kid before they came to that coach? Maybe that kid was a 14 and now they're a 12.
Yep.
So, it could be the case that the coaches actually hurt the kids' progress as opposed to help them. But joking aside, I mean, I feel like we've got to do a better job at understanding the limits of what these numbers can do. They have value. They are a necessary part of the developmental process because everybody wants some sort of gauge to know that they're improving. And what better way than a rating or a ranking to say, last year I was this year I'm this higher thing, so I'm getting better. That's great. We need that as encouragement. As parents, we need to see that to keep justifying all the time and money we're investing in this process with our children. But at the same time, we've got to learn to take a step back from that and dissociate ratings and rankings with value and, keep it all in perspective. So, um, Josh, you kind of hinted that you have some specific tools that you like to share with junior athletes to help them manage the mental side of their game, their emotions better on and off the court. Would you be willing to share some of those with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way I kind of break it down is between certain specific skills and tools mentally, just like someone has their forehand and backhand and serve physically, building different tools mentally as well. So, one of the two pieces are, certain specific skills and tools to help that athlete feel equipped to handle situations. And I'll give some examples. And the other piece are just some bigger picture concepts, right? How, it might be about confidence, right? Why does confidence go up and down in the way that it does? Or talk about motivation and helping an athlete really try to be as clear as possible about why they play, or, maybe different ways to think about pressure or losing, or, things like that. But yeah, with the specific skills and tools, certain things that I focus on are self-talk, trying to help an athlete be as aware as possible of how they're actually communicating with themselves in different moments, and then helping to build some tools for more intentional self-talk. We could talk about routines as well, both routines that can be used before or after playing, and trying to make those as automatic as possible, but oftentimes really trying to focus on that time while they're playing, whether it's changeovers or often, that really focusing on that time in between points and trying to make sure that, they're able to use a routine to help them reset and put whatever happened in that last point behind them, that double fault, that missed overhead, that shot that they think was in, that their opponent called out, and put it behind them, reset, and get ready for the next point and go in. Again, we use that word again, intention, go in with a clear intention into the next point. And it's a quick process. It's usually about 20 seconds or so. So not, a whole lot of time, but trying to make that a habit, and make it as automatic as possible, which, people like Dr. Jim Lear talked about the 16-second cure. And, a lot of people in this space talk about, but I think it's, when you watch, whether it's a junior tennis tournament or even the pros, there are times where it doesn't feel like somebody has fully put the last point behind them. So trying to make that as consistent as possible. So self-talk, routines. We could talk about visualization, talk about breathing exercises, preparation strategies, different relaxation strategies. So just helping them kind of build this toolkit of different tools and strategies so that when different moments on the court come up, and they will, that they feel, equipped and ready to handle, whatever might be thrown their way.
It's interesting to me to watch post-match interviews with the pros and even with top juniors. And One of the things that I really love hearing these athletes talk about is comebacks in matches where they've lost the first set, or they're down a double break in the set and they come back and win the set. And a message that I hear repeatedly from players who reach the highest levels and stay at the highest level is they say they know they have put in the work off the court, and they trust that work when they're in these difficult moments during the match and on the court. And I think that's a really important message for our youngest athletes to hear, that it's not always about what's happening in that moment on the court, but did you get the amount of sleep that you need to get? Did you eat properly? Did you put in the strength and conditioning effort and work that you needed to do? Did you warm up and stretch and do those routines? Did you put in the work to develop your between point routines and your side change routines? And are you using those? And when you know in your heart that you have put that work in, then you go on court having the confidence that, I can only control what's happening on my side, but I know I've done everything possible. So I'm going to feel good about being able to go out and compete at my best, whether or not I win the match.
Absolutely. I think you brought up a couple of important pieces there. Number one, this idea of trying to control what you can or control the controllables, I think is foundational. And there's always going to be factors out of your control, who, your opponent, the draw, the weather, the court, who's next to you, who's watching, who's not watching. But can I, really focus on controlling what I can? And I think a big part of that is, what happens off the court, the training, whether that's on the practice court, whether it's at home, whether it's on the mental side or strength and conditioning side, nutrition, sleep. So being able to trust that, actually, it reminds me of a few years ago, I visited JTCC, the Junior Tennis Champion Center down in Maryland, and they have a big sign there that all their athletes can prominently see that says just that: trust your training. And I think it's a nice reminder. And I think when an athlete is in a place of they're in a match and maybe they're uncertain about their backhand, let's just say, and they're thinking about their technique and they're telling themselves, okay, I have to get into into closed stance. I need to step into the ball and I need to get my racket back a little further than I have been. And I need to make contact, out in front, but not too out in front. And I need to, finish across the body. And they're giving themselves so many technical instructions. That's kind of the opposite of that. That's when they're not trusting their training, everything that's gone into it. And I think, we want junior athletes to be in a place where when they're on court, they're able to play in, more of a relaxed way and trust everything that's gone into it. And, they're spending a lot of hours, they're working really hard at it. And to be able to remember that. And, there are times to focus on technique. Certainly on the practice court is a great time to do that. But, when it comes to a match, when it comes to competition, it's about trusting what you have, remembering all the work that you've put in from a technique standpoint, but also mentally, right? Okay, I've spent time visualizing moments like this and, mentally rehearsing how I want to handle it. Or I've, prepared my self-talk and planned out how I want to be talking to myself. Doesn't mean I'm going to be perfect, but I'm able to trust myself, and I'm able to use that tool of self-talk in this moment, for example. So I think that idea of trusting your training is really key. And I think, when players are able to do that, it leads to a certain confidence because they're not second guessing themselves or they're not doubting themselves. I think when there's too much instruction that somebody's giving themselves when they're actually out there, it tends to lead to, paralysis by analysis, where they're, maybe freezing up or tightening up because they don't trust themselves to execute the action. They're, giving themselves so many instructions that it sends a message to themselves that they don't really believe that they can do it. And I think, through through finding more trust, which is a process over time, players can, let go and really do what they're, what they're capable of doing, because they're not getting in their own way through that second guessing process.
And just to clarify, Josh, at what age should all of this type of work be happening? And over what period of time? I mean, I don't want a parent of a 6-year-old player to have an expectation that that 6-year-old is going to go out onto the match court and be able to do all of these things that you and I have been discussing, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's not realistic.
Absolutely. I think for players of each age, there are different expectations and there's different pieces mentally, whether it's, whether there's a sports psychology professional who's helping that process, or whether it's through instructions from a parent or a coach. But I think at each age, there are different reasonable expectations that a parent can have for their child. If that 6-year-old has been playing for a couple of years and is, playing at their, at the local park or local tennis club, and is playing a set, I think they're, is playing a set or a tiebreaker or competing, in a queen of the court game, whatever it may be. I think there are certain expectations that a parent can have for them, right? Maybe it's that they'll show good sportsmanship. Maybe it's that they'll shake their opponent's hand at the end of the match, win or lose. Maybe it's that if they do lose, maybe not right away, but maybe 30 minutes later or an hour later, that there can be a conversation that can take place. And we can talk, we could have an entire podcast probably about that car ride home. But
oh yeah, we've had that talk lots of times here.
I get it. But yeah, I think for a 6-year-old, honestly, there are certain expectations. It's going to look very different than a 15-year-old who's maybe been playing for 10 years or 8 years and, has been playing USTA tournaments for a number of years. And, I think, for somebody that age, there are going to be more expectations, which are reasonable. And that player has also had a lot more chances to make mistakes, handle situations not so well, handle situations better, and hopefully learn from them. So I think at each age in the process, there are things that, parents can expect. And I think that should be an open conversation and an ongoing one. But yeah, I think it's, there's not really, I think what often ends up happening is athletes start learning the game and they're focusing on, the technique and the strategy piece. And then inevitably an issue comes up mentally. They're not handling their emotions as well as they want to, or pressure is getting in their way, or they're having an injury. They have an injury and they're able to come back physically, but maybe not trusting themselves mentally. So something comes up and then the mental piece is addressed, where I think, instead trying to, and this could either be done through sessions or not, depending on the age and situation, but trying to give some sort of focus to the mental side of the game, early on, I think can really pay dividends, because you build that foundation from a young age, and that athlete is able to, is able to start that process of building tools and learning from their experiences at younger ages, rather than being more reactive to addressing it once a problem comes up a little bit later.
Sure. Well, and you mentioned, having expectations of a young player to show good sportsmanship. But how does a child learn what that means? What is good sportsmanship, right? You have to have that conversation with your child. The coach should be having those conversations with their players, setting expectations of how you behave during tournament play, how you behave at practice, how you behave when you go off by yourself and play a practice match with one of your friends. Those expectations need to be set from day one so that the child can start to internalize that and put those things into practice. That said, they're going to mess up, as we talked about earlier. And as the parent, please don't have an unrealistic expectation of your child behaving in a certain way when they may not have the emotional maturity yet or the knowledge and experience yet to exhibit the behavior that you think they should be exhibiting. Maybe they're learning something not so great from you by watching you. So you as the parent also, and I'm saying you, but I mean me as well, we need to exhibit the behaviors that we want our children to adopt because we are their first teachers. And again, when we mess up and when they mess up, we need to have conversations about that so that we can fix it, learn from it, and move forward to the next phase of things. Josh, we are nearing the end of our hour here. I want to give you an opportunity to share with our audience how they can reach out to you, how they can get more information about the work you do. So please, this is your time to promote.
Yeah, absolutely. The best place would be my website, which is tiebreakerpsych.com. Obviously, a little bit of a tennis reference there. And, I offer a free 30-minute intro session or consultation just so I can meet somebody, learn a little more about them. They, share a little bit about myself as well, and just kind of see how it's a good fit. So feel free to go on my website. There's some more information there, and you could just fill out a short form if you're, interested at all. But yeah, there's just some more information there. I also do a podcast on the mental side of tennis with Dr. Brian Lomax, who's a mentor and a good friend. And we, talk about a lot of these same sorts of things that we've been talking about. So some more, information on that side of things there. But yeah, would love to, stay connected. There's also my, email and phone number on my website. So always looking to connect with people and to keep in touch or just to talk through some of these things.
And we'll have all those links in the show notes. So wherever you're consuming this podcast, whether it's on our YouTube channel, our website, Spotify, any of the other podcast apps, that information will be in the show notes. So make sure you take a look and reach out if you or your child could benefit from Josh's services. And I would hazard a guess that there's really not anybody that couldn't benefit from what you offer, Josh. We all can do better and should try to do better, in my opinion. So I hope all of you will check out Josh's website and will reach out to him if you are in need of his services. Josh, it has been a pleasure to meet with you and to chat with you. And I so appreciate you taking time to come share your knowledge and experience and expertise with all of us.
Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast. Really love what you're doing with Parenting Aces, doing a real, just real service. That's such a great resource to so many just so many tennis parents, tennis families. So thank you for all that you do, and it's been wonderful speaking with you.
To my audience, thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on Parenting Aces.